Welcome! I'm so glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, I want to ask you something simple. Where are you listening from right now? Maybe you're in bed, maybe on the couch, or maybe you just press play to escape the noise of the day. Wherever you are, know that this space is just for you. Take a slow breath in and let it go. Feel your shoulders soften and your eyes grow heavier with each blink. You don't need to do anything else. Just let the words carry you. In a few minutes, you might notice your thoughts drifting, almost as if your mind has decided to wander on its own. That's completely okay. It's a gentle process, and you won't even realize when it begins. So, get comfortable, rest your head. The story is about to start, and soon, without effort, you'll be somewhere far, quiet, and calm. Overthinking is a pattern of thought where the mind stays with one subject or problem longer than is useful. It means going over the same ideas repeatedly, even when no new information is added. Some people describe it as mental spinning, like a wheel that turns without moving forward. This kind of repetitive processing can become tiring, and as you listen, you may notice that the mind itself can drift much deeper without effort. In psychology, overthinking is often grouped under the concept of rumination. Rumination is a form of persistent thinking about causes, meanings, or consequences of problems. It does not always lead to solutions. Instead, it may create a cycle where the same concerns replay in the mind. This differs from active problem solving, which moves toward a specific decision or action. Researchers explain that overthinking may develop from the brain's natural desire to predict and control outcomes. When faced with uncertainty, the mind may search for patterns. If no clear answer appears, the search may continue without resolution. In practice, this can make simple decisions feel heavier than they need to be. Over time, overthinking can occur in many areas. Some people overthink relationships. Others may overthink tasks at work or school. The content differs, but the process is the same. A loop of repeated evaluation. The loop may give a sense of being busy, but little progress is made. An example is deciding what to say in a conversation. A person may think through many possible phrases. After the conversation ends, they may replay it again and again, questioning if they said the right words. The action is finished, but the mind keeps rechecking. This is the core of overthinking. In simple terms, overthinking is like reading the same page of a book repeatedly. Each read-through feels like it could help, but the person is not moving to the next page. The book itself does not change, but the reader remains stuck. This captures the cycle in a concrete way. Cognitive psychology looks at overthinking through processes of attention and memory. Attention is drawn inward, away from the present moment. Memory feeds the loop by recalling past mistakes or imagined futures. The two systems work together to hold the person in repetitive cycles. The mechanism is not faulty, but it is overused. By contrast, adaptive thinking allows attention to shift outward. It may consider options briefly, then move on to action. Adaptive thinking works like a flexible lens, able to zoom in and then zoom out. Overthinking, however, locks the lens into a narrow close-up view. The flexibility is lost. It may help to see overthinking as a strategy the mind uses when it feels unsure. If the environment is unclear, the brain doubles down on analysis. The intent is safety. The outcome, however, can be paralysis. The brain wants certainty, but the world rarely gives absolute answers. The mismatch creates tension. In practice, this shows up in daily choices. Choosing what to eat, what to wear, or how to reply to a message may take much longer. The individual may go back and forth, fearing the wrong choice. After the choice is made, the mind may revisit it again, wondering if another path would have been better. Overthinking can also link with perfectionism. Perfectionism is the desire to do things without mistakes. When this desire is strong, the mind may search endlessly for the best answer. Overthinking becomes the tool used to chase this unreachable standard. The result is exhaustion, not perfection. Some researchers suggest that overthinking is tied to metacognition, or thinking about thinking. Humans can reflect on their own thoughts, which is a strength. But when reflection becomes constant, it turns inward too much. Instead of helping to regulate thoughts, it keeps them looping. This is one reason overthinking feels both logical and draining at the same time. One distinction to make is between short-term analysis and long-term overthinking. Short-term analysis is useful when solving problems, like planning a trip or reviewing a project. It has a start, a process, and an end. Long-term overthinking, however, lacks a clear end. The analysis never feels finished. That is why people may lie awake at night replaying ideas with no resolution. A study of decision-making illustrates this. When given too many choices, people often overthink. The phenomenon is called choice overload. Instead of selecting one option and moving forward, the brain compares and recompares each possibility. Even after a decision, satisfaction is lower. This demonstrates how overthinking can reduce the feeling of closure. Over time, the habit of overthinking may condition the brain. The more a person practices repeated evaluation, the easier it becomes to slip back into that state. In this way, overthinking can be seen as a learned mental style. It is not simply a reaction, but a pattern strengthened by use. The mechanisms of overthinking involve several cognitive functions working together. Attention is one of them. When attention becomes locked on one subject, it limits flexibility. Instead of moving smoothly across different tasks or topics, it remains fixed. This narrowing of focus is useful in problem solving, but in overthinking, it becomes rigid. Memory is another mechanism. The mind recalls past experiences to compare and analyze. In overthinking, memory replays the same events many times. The replay can be exact, as if the brain is stuck on a recording, or it can be imagined variations, where the person creates alternate versions of what could have been said or done. Both forms keep the loop active. Imagination also plays a role. Humans can picture the future and simulate possible outcomes. In overthinking, imagination produces endless scenarios. The person may picture both positive and negative futures, but the cycle rarely ends in resolution. Each scenario produces another set of questions, which adds to the loop. Language is central as well. Inner speech, or the silent talking we do in the mind, fuels overthinking. The words we repeat to ourselves can extend the thought cycle. A sentence like, "What if I had done that differently?" can trigger new lines of thought. In this way, language acts like a spark that keeps the mental fire burning. When these functions combine, attention, memory, imagination, and language, the cycle strengthens. Each one feeds the others. Memory brings up the past. Imagination projects the future. Language frames it into words. Attention keeps it locked in place. Together, they create the loop we call overthinking. Common patterns of overthinking can be observed in daily life. One common form is overthinking past mistakes. A person may replay a conversation where they believe they spoke poorly. Another is overthinking future choices. A person may analyze all possible outcomes of a decision. Both share the same feature, repetitive cycling without closure. Another pattern is what researchers call catastrophizing. This is when the mind imagines the worst-case scenario repeatedly. Even if the chance is low, the mind magnifies it. The person feels they must prepare for every possible failure. In practice, this creates stress, but rarely helps with actual outcomes. There is also second guessing. This happens after decisions are made. The mind goes back to review the choice, questioning if it was right. Instead of moving forward, the person remains mentally stuck at the decision point. The choice is made, but the thought loop does not end. Overthinking can also appear in social contexts. Some people replay interactions, analyzing what others might have thought. They may examine tone of voice, body language, or small details. Because social situations are complex, the mind finds many possible interpretations. This endless search keeps the loop going. A different but related form is called analysis paralysis. This happens when too much thought prevents action. The person cannot decide because each option feels equally weighted. By the time a choice is made, opportunities may have passed. The cycle itself blocked forward movement. In contrast, flexible thinking is able to evaluate, choose, and then stop. The difference is not in intelligence, but in the ability to set an endpoint. Flexible thinking accepts that no decision is perfect. Overthinking rejects this and continues searching for an ideal answer. The result is delay. Over time, repeated overthinking may create habits. For example, lying in bed may automatically trigger replay of the day. Sitting down to work may trigger endless planning instead of starting. These habits build connections in the brain. They become learned routines, even if they are unhelpful. Understanding the strange psychology of overthinking also means looking at why it persists. One reason is perceived control. The mind feels it is taking action by thinking more. The belief is that enough thought will bring certainty, yet certainty is rarely possible. The mismatch keeps the cycle alive. Another reason is emotional relief. Thinking gives temporary comfort, as if the problem is being managed, but the relief does not last. Once the loop ends, the anxiety or doubt may return. This pushes the person back into more overthinking. It becomes a short-term relief that sustains long-term cycles. The predictability of the loop can also make it feel safe. Even though it is tiring, it is familiar. The mind prefers known discomfort over unknown outcomes. Overthinking provides a structured routine, even if it does not solve the issue. Familiarity itself becomes reinforcing. Overthinking can be connected to the concept of cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the amount of mental effort being used in working memory at one time. Working memory is the system that temporarily holds and manipulates information. It is useful for tasks like solving problems, learning new information, or planning, but it has limits. When overthinking occurs, working memory becomes filled with repeated material. Instead of processing new input, it replays the same content. The load is heavy, but it does not move forward. This means fewer resources are available for new learning or action. In simple terms, overthinking fills the mental space with clutter. An example is studying for an exam. A student may review the same point again and again, unsure if they remember it well enough. The time and effort used on repetition reduce the space for other material. The cycle creates fatigue, but not much progress. This shows how overthinking uses working memory in unproductive ways. Another link is to uncertainty. Human beings have a natural discomfort with not knowing outcomes. Uncertainty triggers a search for information. Overthinking is one form of this search. The mind attempts to resolve the gap by filling it with analysis. But because uncertainty can rarely be removed fully, the cycle continues. Researchers studying uncertainty note that people differ in tolerance. Some can accept not knowing and move on. Others feel the need to keep thinking until they feel safe. This trait is called intolerance of uncertainty. People with low tolerance may be more prone to overthinking. Their minds resist, leaving questions unanswered. Over time, the brain may learn that thinking longer equals feeling safer, even if only briefly. This reinforces the loop. The person might believe that not thinking would be careless. This belief adds pressure to continue overthinking, as if thinking itself prevents mistakes. In practice, this creates more tension than relief. Another theory connects overthinking with reinforcement learning. Reinforcement learning in psychology means that behaviors are repeated if they bring rewards. In overthinking, the reward may be the small sense of relief that comes from analysis. Even if the relief is short, it still strengthens the cycle. The brain learns, thinking more helps me feel better. This is similar to how habits form. A behavior repeated with reward becomes automatic. Overthinking may begin as a choice, but through reinforcement it becomes a habit. Once habitual, the cycle feels harder to stop. The person may not realize they have slipped into it. It is also important to consider metacognition. Metacognition is the awareness and control of one's own thinking. People can reflect on thoughts, evaluate them, and guide them. In overthinking, metacognition becomes misapplied. Instead of guiding thoughts, it adds more layers. The person thinks about their thinking in ways that add to the cycle. An example is worrying about worrying. A person may notice that they worry too much, then begin analyzing why they worry. This adds a second layer of thought, making the loop deeper. The problem is no longer just the first worry, but also the worry about the worry. This shows how metacognition can amplify cycles. Another concept is attentional control. Attentional control refers to the ability to shift focus when needed. In overthinking, attentional control may be weaker. The person struggles to disengage from the subject. They remain locked on one idea, even when it is no longer useful. In contrast, stronger attentional control allows smoother transitions between topics. Overthinking can also be studied in the context of problem-solving strategies. Productive problem-solving often involves generating ideas, evaluating them, and then choosing one. Overthinking may get stuck in the evaluation stage. Ideas are reviewed endlessly without reaching a choice. This is like a loop that cuts off before the end. In practice, overthinking can be observed in workplace settings. For instance, in group meetings, decisions may stall when members repeatedly revisit the same points. Even when enough information exists, the group may delay action out of fear of error. This collective overthinking mirrors the individual process. Overthinking is also influenced by culture. In some cultures, thorough analysis is valued. People may be encouraged to reflect deeply before acting. While this has benefits, it may also increase the risk of overthinking. The boundary between careful analysis and excessive repetition becomes thin. The strange quality of overthinking is that it feels rational while being inefficient. Each cycle seems to have logic. The reasoning may be sound in part, but because it repeats without end, the usefulness declines. This is why some describe it as rational activity with irrational duration. Overthinking can be connected to how learning and memory consolidation work. Memory consolidation is the process where new information is stabilized and stored for the long term. During this process, the brain selects what to keep and what to discard. Overthinking may interfere by repeatedly pulling the same material back into working memory. Instead of allowing the brain to sort and rest, it keeps the content active. For example, after a conversation, the brain normally processes the event, extracts meaning, and stores it. In overthinking, the person replays the conversation many times. Each replay pulls the memory out of consolidation and back into active processing. This can prevent natural fading, making the event feel more present than it is. This process may explain why certain thoughts feel sticky. They remain vivid because they are rehearsed too much. Rehearsal is helpful for learning, but in overthinking, the rehearsal does not serve a purpose. It strengthens memory without producing new understanding. The event becomes sharper in recall, but heavier in emotional weight. The connection between overthinking and sleep is also important. Sleep supports memory consolidation, but if the mind is busy with loops, falling asleep can take longer. Even when sleep occurs, the mental rehearsal may reduce the quality of rest. This is why overthinking often feels strongest at night, when the brain is less occupied by tasks. Researchers studying sleep note that repetitive thought patterns can delay the natural slowing of mental activity. Instead of winding down, the brain stays active. The body may be tired, but the mind is still cycling. This mismatch creates the familiar experience of lying awake with racing thoughts. Overthinking also connects with habits of attention. Attention works like a spotlight, selecting what the mind focuses on. Over time, repeated focus on similar worries conditions the spotlight to return to them quickly. This is why people often overthink the same subjects. The brain has learned where to aim the light. This habit is reinforced by emotional salience. Emotional salience means the importance the brain assigns to certain events. Mistakes, conflicts, or uncertainties are tagged as important. The spotlight of attention is drawn back to them, even when the person wants to focus elsewhere. The result is repeated looping on emotionally charged material. An example is a small error at work. Even if it was minor, the emotional tag may be strong. The brain replays it again and again. Each replay strengthens the tag, making it even harder to ignore. The loop continues because the brain has labeled the event as meaningful. Over time, this pattern may create a bias toward negative events. Positive experiences may fade faster, while negative ones are rehearsed more. This is called the negativity bias. It reflects the brain's survival history, where paying attention to threats was more important than dwelling on neutral or pleasant events. In modern life, this bias feeds overthinking. Another angle is the role of uncertainty in learning. Learning often involves not knowing and then discovering. If the brain resists not knowing, it may overthink instead of learning naturally. This can slow growth because the person is caught in cycles rather than moving through trial and error. In simple terms, learning requires some tolerance of gaps. Overthinking tries to fill gaps before new input arrives. By doing so, it can block the flow of learning. The person may appear busy, but progress is slower. This shows how overthinking not only drains energy, but can reduce efficiency and growth. Researchers studying metacognitive awareness suggest that gently observing thought can reduce loops. Awareness means noticing the process without judgment. For example, recognizing this is a replay without trying to stop it. This small step can reduce attachment. The thought may still occur, but it passes more quickly. The role of self-talk is also significant. Self-talk refers to the silent dialogue we have with ourselves. In overthinking, self-talk often takes the form of questions without answers. These questions may begin with what if or why. Because answers are unclear, the mind keeps generating more questions. The cycle grows. By contrast, self-talk can also calm loops. Phrases like, "I have thought enough for now," or "I will return to this later," create closure. Even if the issue is unresolved, the mind receives a signal to pause. This shows how language can either extend or reduce overthinking depending on its form. Another strange feature of overthinking is the way it tries to prepare us for every possible outcome, as if the mind were rehearsing for a play that will never be performed. You may notice yourself mentally running through scenarios, what you would say if someone responds in a certain way, how you might act if the situation turns against you, or what steps you could take if things go wrong. This constant rehearsal gives the illusion of control, but in truth, it is only a repetitive loop of possibilities that often never come true. The brain seems to prefer the safety of imagined rehearsals over the uncertainty of reality. Yet this preference comes at the cost of rest, peace, and clarity. The longer the rehearsals run, the more the lines blur, until every possibility feels like a probability, and every potential misstep feels like an impending disaster. When you overthink, time itself becomes distorted. A single minute may feel stretched into 10. Thoughts repeat so often that they create a sense of déjà vu, as though you are caught in a cycle you cannot escape. Psychologists sometimes call this cognitive time distortion. It can make you believe that you have been trapped in the same problem for hours, when in reality, only a short span has passed. This distortion reinforces the feeling of being stuck. The mind begins to measure progress not in solutions, but in the number of times it has circled around the same idea. It is much like walking in circles through a foggy forest. Every turn looks familiar, every path seems repeated, and yet you feel compelled to keep walking, hoping eventually you will stumble upon the way out. Another curious quality of overthinking is its relationship with memory. The human brain does not store memories as perfect recordings, but rather as reconstructed impressions. Each time we revisit a memory through overthinking, we alter it slightly, adding a new detail, shifting the focus, or changing the emotional tone. Over time, the memory may no longer reflect what truly happened, but instead what the mind has rehearsed again and again. This is why overthinking often makes past events seem worse than they were. A simple mistake can transform into a humiliating failure. A brief silence in conversation can become a symbol of rejection. The more the mind turns these memories over, the more polished and exaggerated they become, until they feel almost larger than life. This reshaping of memory keeps the cycle of worry alive, because the brain treats the reconstructed version as reality. Overthinking also tends to magnify what psychologists call cognitive distortions. These are patterns of thinking that twist reality into unhelpful shapes. For example, catastrophizing makes us believe the worst possible outcome is the most likely. Black and white thinking convinces us that things are either perfect or a complete failure, with no middle ground. Personalization leads us to believe that unrelated events are somehow our fault. Overthinking fuels all of these distortions by feeding them constant attention. The more we dwell on them, the more real they feel. They grow heavy with repetition until the mind begins to accept them as truth. In this way, overthinking is not only a passive process, but an active sculptor, shaping the way we view ourselves, others, and the world.